Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I want to answer a question about large age difference relationships. So this is typically defined as a relationship where there's 10 or more years separating the couple. A lot of times we think of this as applying to a man who's older than a woman, but it doesn't have to. It can also apply to a woman older than a man, and it can apply to same-sex couples. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm really going to be focusing on what I see commonly, which is a man who's older than a woman, again 10 years or more. And we know that this particular arrangement, this occurs about 7% of the time. That's what the research tells us. A woman being older than a man, that occurs around 1% of the time. And in terms of same-sex relationships, we don't really have solid figures on that. There are estimates that are as low as 10% and as high as 25%. So we see some variation there in same-sex relationships. So again, here looking at heterosexual relationships where the man is at least 10 years older than the woman. So I've received a lot of questions on this, and most of the questions are really asking, do these relationships work? Do they have the same probability of success? Is the relational satisfaction the same? What challenges do I see with these relationships that wouldn't be present with, say, a relationship where there's a 1 or 2 year gap? That's a fairly common gap, 1 or 2 years. When we get, again, to 10 years or more, it becomes uncommon, as I mentioned. Well, we know from the literature that these relationships do have a higher probability of failure, and they do have lower level of satisfaction associated with them. Now, of course, this isn't every relationship where there's an age difference of 10 years or more, but this is what we see in the literature. Now, I would actually define age difference in terms of whether it's problematic or not a little differently. I would use a few different cutoffs. The first cutoff I would use would be based on this idea that some of the relationship factors are internal and some are external. So what's the age gap where people in society first start to notice? Well, this depends on the culture, what country you live in, and other circumstances. But here in the United States, I would say, this is just my opinion, that 7 years would be where people on the outside start to raise an eyebrow. It's when they start to notice that this relationship has a characteristic that's a little different than others. In terms of when would it become problematic at a more regular level, I wouldn't say 10 years. In my experience, I would say 12 years. Again, just my opinion, what I've noticed from counseling many couples who have been in this situation. Whether the age gap is a problem or not also really strongly depends on the values of the people in the couple and what age they're at, right? So if there's a 10-year age difference, or let's use the example of 12 years, because that's where I really view it as having a higher chance of causing a problem, and somebody, say a man is 72, and he's with a woman who's 60, now that could still be problematic, but that doesn't seem to be as problematic as a man who's 34 and a woman who's 22 being in a relationship. That seems to be a larger age difference, even though the years are the same, because of where they are in terms of age, right? So what types of issues and problems they're going to face. For example, with 72-year-old and 60-year-old, the debate about having kids probably wouldn't be an issue. It could, I guess, but it probably wouldn't be. And at the younger age, probably more likely. We would actually expect that to be a problem we would see when we talk about people that are in childbearing years. Now, in terms of mortality, that would be more of an issue, of course, at the higher end. And all things being equal, the person who's older is going to have a higher probability of dying first in that couple. So this is another issue, and it's kind of morbid, but it has to be faced, I think, directly. You have to have an honest discussion, honest communication about long-term planning, if long-term planning is really one of your goals in a relationship. Some people view relationships as more transactional, so long-term strategic planning really wouldn't matter in those situations. Now, I've, again, counseled a lot of people in this situation, and I find this particular circumstance, this large age difference relationship, to be fascinating or at least interesting. And one of the things I've seen repeatedly is that when we look at relationships, oftentimes we think of a lot of factors as being negotiable, right? Who's going to cook dinner tonight? Who's going to clean the house today? Who's going to work? Who's going to go to school? What about childcare? Who's going to take care of the children? Who's going to pay the bills? A lot of things in a relationship can be negotiated. And what I see oftentimes is that people want to negotiate the age difference. Not the factors or the values around it, but the actual difference. So I've heard something like this a lot. Well, he's 15 years older if he could just be 10 years older. Well, okay, I don't know how that would work, right? I mean, the age difference is what it is for that couple. I've even seen people say, if he could just lose 5 years or 7 years, I'd be willing to do more work around the house. Again, like it's something that can move. This is really just a form of denial. Now, your attitude toward that age difference can change, but the actual number of years separating two people can't change. This is just logic. But again, as I talked about, this is really more about denial. I think people understand the mathematics of it at a certain level, but they go into denial. So this reminds me of a movie that I saw not that long ago, but it came out several years ago. It was named American Hustle. And Christian Bale and Amy Adams were actors in the movie, and they played these con artists. Can't remember the character's name, but Christian Bale's character at one point in the movie has this line, "People believe what they want to believe." And not only was this appropriate in the context of the movie, this is one of the best lines ever to apply to various situations that we see in counseling. And that includes, sometimes, these large age difference relationships. If somebody wants to believe that the age difference isn't there, or that somehow it'll change, that's what they're going to believe. Now, I've seen a lot of people attempt to give advice on this issue. And there, of course, is no advice that works for everybody. But I've seen people try to make blanket statements like, well, to avoid some of the problems of large age difference relationships, simply avoid those relationships. But we know it's not that simple. A lot of times, by the time a couple sees me, they're already committed in the relationship. They already want the relationship to work. So it's a matter of how do I get past this, not can this relationship end. Because the truth of it is the heart wants what it wants. When people fall in love, reason tends to get sacrificed in that process. Not always, but sometimes. Not that it's always reasonable to avoid those relationships, but rather it's always reasonable to take a hard look at the different qualities of a relationship and evaluate it fairly. That doesn't happen many times in my experience when people are in love. So the advice of just avoid those relationships, I think that doesn't make sense at a lot of levels. People aren't going to, and also they're not inherently bad. They're not destined to fail. It's just another challenge that you have to navigate. Relationships come with a lot of challenges. I think another part of this is working to accept the age difference, working on values. A lot of communication, as I mentioned, I think is really crucial with these relationships. And I think, too, not getting too negativistic. Yes, an age difference can be an encumbrance, especially when it reaches 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. But it doesn't have to mean the relationship is going to fail. And it doesn't have to mean there's low satisfaction. Now, I have a bias, I suppose, because when people come in to see me, they're usually trying to fix the relationship. So I've actually seen a lot of these relationships work. But it might be that the kind of couples that would come see a counselor are the kind of couples that are more oriented to solving the problem and have a better chance of solving the problem, if they view that as a problem at all. Whereas another couple who doesn't want to see a counselor, maybe that predisposes them for greater risk. I've actually seen, again, a lot of these age gap relationships work out pretty well. And I'm not just talking about small differences like 10 years or 13 years. I'm talking about 20, 25, and even 30-year differences. And I've seen couples with those age differences who worked it out. Yes, there are some factors they have to accept, but they tend to be happy. Now, again, I'm biased because I'm seeing people that come in to see a counselor, and that may change the odds of success. But still, there are a lot of examples out there of couples that are happy with these age differences. I'd be curious to see what other people's opinions are in terms of what constitutes an age difference where people are going to pay attention, what's problematic, are those number of years the same or different? Remember, I conceptualized them as a bit different. So if you wouldn't mind making a comment to that effect, kind of how you see this issue and your experience with large age difference relationships. I would really appreciate reading those comments. I think that would create an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this video to be interesting, and thanks for watching.